It started with a ceremony invitation that suddenly vanished from royal schedules overnight. Courtiers insisted it was only a minor adjustment, but the silence surrounding Meghan's expected appearance told another story entirely. Then came the photographs Prince William leaving a private strategy meeting with Princess Beatrice beside him, both carrying official briefing folders marked for a charity patronage event Meghan was once expected to lead. Within hours, insiders realized the palace wasn't reorganizing a ceremony. It was rewriting the line of royal trust itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. According to reports circulating through royal media circles, Meghan had been preparing for the event for weeks. The ceremony was expected to place her at the center of a major initiative tied to youth outreach and veterans rehabilitation, two causes the palace had once believed could help stabilize her public standing. But something changed behind closed doors at Kensington Palace. Less than 48 hours before the ceremony, internal scheduling documents were quietly altered. Meghan's name, once positioned prominently in briefing drafts and logistical coordination notes, allegedly began disappearing line by line. At first, aides dismissed the changes as procedural adjustments. Yet royal correspondents immediately sensed the atmosphere had shifted. One palace insider reportedly described the mood as controlled panic, with communications teams scrambling to contain questions before the press could connect the dots. What truly intensified speculation, however, was the emergence of Princess Beatrice's name inside the updated coordination lists. Sources familiar with the planning process claim her involvement was not expected until the very last moment. Yet suddenly, Beatrice was being briefed alongside senior trustees and foundation representatives connected to the event. Then came whispers of a private meeting involving William, senior advisors, and charity officials inside Kensington Palace itself. Various interpretations of that meeting suggest difficult conversations had been unfolding for months concerning donor confidence, internal palace discipline, and what some insiders carefully described as protocol instability. Though no public statement acknowledged conflict directly, the timing of the cancellation left almost no room for coincidence. Behind the scenes, insiders whisper that William had grown increasingly concerned about preserving what he viewed as institutional consistency during one of the monarchy's most fragile modern periods. With King Charles continuing to battle ongoing health difficulties and senior royals attempting to project stability, reports suggest the future king had become deeply focused on surrounding major royal initiatives with what he allegedly called reliable working structures. To some palace veterans, that phrase carried enormous meaning. It was not merely about scheduling preferences. It was about trust, about who could still represent the institution without bringing unpredictable controversy crashing into carefully managed royal operations. And as donor concerns reportedly intensified over recent months, pressure inside palace walls only continued building. Meanwhile, royal communications teams were allegedly thrown into turmoil as rumors of the switch began leaking outward. Several correspondents reportedly contacted palace offices seeking clarification after noticing Meghan's absence from updated internal guidance. But instead of firm denials, they encountered unusual silence. That silence became louder than any statement could have been. By the time photographs surfaced of William and Beatrice leaving the strategy session together, the speculation had transformed into something far more dangerous for palace officials to contain. Because suddenly the story was no longer about a cancelled appearance. It was about a deliberate transfer of royal confidence from one figure to another. And according to those watching closely, the monarchy had just sent a message far colder than anyone expected. But behind the cancelled ceremony was something far more explosive than a scheduling dispute. It was the beginning of a silent royal counteroffensive years in the making. Long before Meghan's ceremony disappeared from the calendar, senior royals were already debating a dangerous question behind palace walls. What happens when personal branding begins overshadowing royal duty itself? The charity role was never meant to be treated like an ordinary public appearance. Reports suggest it carried symbolic weight because of its connection to Queen Elizabeth II's lifelong belief in service without spectacle. To the old guard, this was not simply a platform, not a stage, and not a polished return to favorable headlines. It was a sacred trust. It belonged to the institution before it belonged to any individual. And that distinction, insiders whisper, became the quiet fault line beneath everything that followed. For months, senior courtiers had allegedly grown uneasy about the atmosphere surrounding Sussex-related publicity. Donor groups, according to palace whispers, wanted reassurance that the event would remain focused on the cause itself, not on headlines, rival narratives, or another round of royal tension. Nobody said it publicly. Nobody wanted another open family crisis. But behind closed doors, the concern was brutal in its simplicity. Could the monarchy attach one of its legacy charities to a figure still surrounded by such unpredictable controversy? That question reportedly landed hardest with William. As King Charles continued facing the pressures of illness and public duty, William was increasingly described as sharper, colder, and less willing to tolerate ambiguity. The future king, once careful to avoid looking too forceful, now seemed to be adopting a different rhythm altogether. Palace insiders began calling it an heirs accord mentality, a quiet alignment between William and trusted senior royals who believed the crown could no longer afford emotional hesitation when institutional stability was at stake. And that is where Beatrice's name began to matter. For years she had existed at the edge of royal attention, never fully central, never entirely absent. But slowly, carefully, she had rebuilt her public standing through restraint. No dramatic declarations, no constant confrontation, no competing royal machine. To courtiers who valued discipline over noise, Beatrice represented something increasingly rare. A royal figure who could support the institution without trying to bend it around herself. So when aides began shifting responsibilities days before the ceremony, the move did not feel random to those watching closely. It felt prepared. It felt tested. It felt like the palace had quietly measured both women against the same unforgiving question: who could carry Queen Elizabeth's legacy without turning it into a personal comeback? Media speculation intensified almost immediately. Responsibilities changed. Briefings narrowed. Certain staff members were reassigned with unusual speed. And still, the palace publicly denied any internal fracture. But denial did not erase the pattern. It only made the silence feel more deliberate. Because by then, the ceremony had already become something bigger than charity. It had become a test of loyalty, discipline, and future royal identity. And while the palace publicly denied any internal conflict, whispers from inside Kensington suggested William had already made his decision long before the public ever noticed. According to palace administrative whispers, Meghan believed the ceremony would mark her symbolic re-entry into meaningful royal influence, a moment carefully designed to restore prestige she feared had been slipping away for years. For Meghan, the patronage event was allegedly more than a calendar appearance. It was supposed to be a statement. Reports suggest the ceremony had been quietly shaped as a polished return to royal relevance, with global media attention expected to follow every detail. The charity's work mattered, but inside palace circles, there were growing concerns that the cause itself was being pulled toward something far more dangerous: a public relations comeback wrapped in royal symbolism. Preparations, according to insiders, had already reached an advanced stage. Revised branding materials were reportedly discussed. Diplomatic guest coordination was said to be underway. Invitations, seating plans, press expectations, and donor visibility all became part of the careful machinery surrounding the event. Yet beneath that polished surface, disagreement was spreading. Some aides allegedly questioned how prominently Meghan should appear in official coverage, while others feared that even a carefully managed role could ignite headlines that would swallow the charity whole. That concern struck at the very heart of the palace's anxiety. The monarchy had spent years trying to separate duty from drama, service from spectacle, and public work from private grievance. But now, with Meghan's name attached to a high-profile patronage ceremony, insiders whisper that old fears returned with force. Would the event honor the charity, or would it become another global referendum on the Sussexes, the Waleses, and the unresolved wounds still bleeding beneath the royal surface? William, according to those familiar with his thinking, was increasingly frustrated by what some described as parallel monarchy optics. It was a phrase loaded with meaning. To his supporters, it suggested the danger of two royal brands moving in opposite directions, one rooted in institution, duty, and hierarchy, the other built around personal narrative, media strategy, and emotional visibility. And for a future king trying to protect the crown during a fragile chapter, that distinction was not cosmetic. It was existential. Senior palace figures reportedly asked the question nobody wanted to say aloud: had trust truly been rebuilt? Not public sympathy. Not popularity. Not media attention. Trust. The kind required to carry a role connected to royal service without turning it into a stage for unresolved conflict. And as that question hardened inside private meetings, Beatrice's sudden involvement was first explained as simple support assistance, a harmless addition, a quiet backup, nothing more. But palace watchers knew how these shifts often begin. First, a new name appears in planning notes. Then, responsibilities move. Then, briefings change. Then, the original figure is gently, almost invisibly, pushed out of the center. By the time Meghan's ceremonial role was quietly removed altogether, the machinery had already done its work. But canceling Meghan's appearance was only the surface-level humiliation. The real shock came when the replacement choice became public. When Princess Beatrice emerged as the new face of the ceremony, even veteran royal correspondents were stunned by the precision of the move. This was no temporary substitution. Reports suggest it was a calculated declaration of the monarchy's new order. The revised palace communications did not shout the change. They did something colder. They placed Beatrice's name exactly where Meghan's had been expected, letting the meaning settle without explanation. No dramatic announcement. No public confrontation. No formal accusation. Just a quiet administrative turn that carried the force of a royal verdict. Inside palace circles, that silence was understood immediately. The crown had not merely adjusted a ceremony. It had chosen who could stand before donors, charities, and the public as a trusted extension of royal duty. Royal insiders allegedly described William's maneuver as surgical institutional warfare because of how cleanly it was executed. Nothing appeared impulsive. Nothing seemed accidental. The structure of the event was reportedly revised with careful approval, and sources claim William personally signed off on the new arrangement before it moved through official channels. To those watching from inside the machinery, the message was unmistakable. Continuity would now matter more than celebrity, discipline more than emotional spectacle, and quiet service more than global attention. That was why Beatrice became such a striking choice. She was not positioned as a headline-hungry replacement, but as proof of a different royal model. Over time, her low-profile presence had made her useful to a palace desperate for calm. She did not arrive with a separate media campaign. She did not carry the same level of public conflict. She represented something safer, steadier, and easier for the institution to control. In the brutal language of court politics, Beatrice was not just acceptable. She was manageable. The comparisons with Meghan came quickly and sharply. Supporters of the Sussexes viewed the switch as humiliating, even punitive, while royal traditionalists saw it as long overdue. To them, the charity could not become another battlefield in the endless war between personal grievance and royal obligation. The palace, they argued, needed figures who could elevate the cause without dragging the crown back into chaos. And once that argument took hold, Meghan's removal began to look less like a personal slight and more like part of a wider strategy. Palace aides were reportedly instructed to avoid discussing Meghan's absence in public. That instruction only deepened suspicion. Because when institutions refuse to explain themselves, people look for meaning in what they refuse to say. Commentators soon began calling the move part of William's emerging future crown strategy. A colder, leaner vision of monarchy where access is earned, not assumed. And beneath all the silence, one truth became impossible to ignore: William had drawn a line, and Beatrice had been placed on the safe side of it. Yet the deeper palace fallout wasn't unfolding in front of cameras, it was happening behind closed doors, where loyalty itself was suddenly being measured. The public only saw a cancelled appearance, but inside royal corridors, insiders whisper the atmosphere became icy, fractured, and deeply personal almost overnight. The decision did not land gently. According to palace whispers, staff members were divided almost from the moment Beatrice's name replaced Meghan's in the revised ceremony structure. Some saw William's move as harsh but necessary, a line drawn to protect the institution from another wave of emotional turbulence. Others feared the consequences would be far more damaging than anyone inside Kensington wanted to admit. Because this was not only about a charity event, it was about family wounds, public humiliation, and the quiet destruction of whatever fragile trust still remained. Meghan's supporters allegedly viewed the cancellation as deliberate, not accidental, not administrative. Deliberate. To them, the timing felt too precise, the replacement too pointed, and the silence too controlled. They argued that removing her from a ceremony tied to service and public compassion was more than a logistical decision. It was a message meant to sting. And in a royal family where every invitation, every absence, and every seat placement can carry hidden meaning, that interpretation spread quickly. Inside the palace, however, others reportedly defended William with equal force. They believed the future king had done what Charles, weakened by illness and emotional conflict, could no longer do decisively. They saw the ceremony switch as institutional protection, a painful but necessary act of discipline at a time when the crown could not afford another public storm. One phrase allegedly began circulating among staff after the decision: duty over drama. Simple words, but in that moment, they carried the weight of an entire royal philosophy. Charles, according to royal insiders, was caught in the middle of it all. On one side was the instinct to preserve family peace, to avoid another fracture involving Harry and Meghan, and to prevent the headlines from becoming openly cruel. On the other side was the harder truth: the monarchy survives through stability, and stability sometimes demands decisions that feel cold. Reports suggest Charles understood both sides, but understanding did not make the choice less painful. Princess Anne and several senior advisors were rumored to support William privately. For them, the issue was not revenge. It was precedent. If a role connected to royal service could be reshaped around personal image, then the institution itself risked becoming vulnerable. Beatrice, meanwhile, allegedly remained cautious. She did not celebrate. She did not provoke. She simply stepped forward with the quiet discipline that had made her acceptable in the first place, and that restraint only made the contrast sharper. Meghan's absence became louder. Beatrice's silence became stronger. William's authority became harder to ignore. But what transformed this from palace gossip into a full royal firestorm was the growing belief that the ceremony cancellation was only the first move in a much larger restructuring plan. As the palace attempted to restore calm, one reality became impossible to ignore. Prince William was no longer behaving like a future king, preparing quietly in the shadows. He was acting like a monarch, already drawing the boundaries of his reign. Royal observers began interpreting the move as part of something far larger than one cancelled ceremony. Reports suggest William was no longer interested in soft ambiguity, careful half measures, or endless attempts to please every side of a fractured family. Instead, a harder philosophy seemed to be emerging around him. Loyalty first, discipline always, and no royal platform without institutional trust. It was a colder vision, yes, but to those who feared the crown had been stretched too thin by years of public conflict, it also felt brutally necessary. Inside palace circles, this new direction was allegedly described as the beginning of a leaner, more controlled future. Working royals would be separated more sharply from celebrity-style influence. Appearances would be measured not by global attention, but by reliability. Patronages would not be treated as personal stages, but as extensions of the crown's duty. And in that changing order, Beatrice's rise carried symbolic force. She was not elevated because she shouted the loudest. She was elevated because she had remained steady when others had become storms. That contrast mattered. Meghan's public profile was larger, brighter, and more internationally charged. But brightness is not always the same as trust. In royal life, silence can be currency. Restraint can become power. And William, according to insiders, appeared determined to restore clarity around who truly represented the monarchy. Not who carried a title, not who commanded headlines, but who could stand beside the institution without pulling attention away from it. The comparison to Queen Elizabeth II became unavoidable. For decades, she had built her authority through discipline, repetition, and duty without spectacle. She understood that monarchy survives not by explaining itself endlessly, but by enduring. William's supporters now framed his decision through that same lens. They argued that the cancelled ceremony was not cruelty. It was correction. A return to the old principle that service must come before self, and that the crown must never become a backdrop for personal reinvention. Still, the emotional cost could not be ignored. Every restructuring inside the House of Windsor carries a human wound beneath the constitutional language. Meghan's exclusion reopened old divisions. Beatrice's elevation created new tensions. Charles was left balancing family pain against institutional survival. And William, whether praised or criticized, had stepped into a role that demanded colder choices than sympathy alone could answer. By the time palace aides tried to lower the temperature, the meaning had already hardened. The cancelled ceremony was no longer just an event that never happened. It had become a warning, a precedent, and perhaps the clearest sign yet of the monarchy William intends to inherit. And as the dust settled over the vanished patronage ceremony, the palace faced an uncomfortable truth: the battle was never really about charity at all, but about who the monarchy still trusted to carry its future. To the public, it looked like a royal scheduling controversy. But to those familiar with palace power dynamics, William's decision carried a far colder message. Access to the crown could still be revoked without warning. Analysts quickly began describing the cancellation as symbolic institutional distancing. It was not loud enough to be called exile, but it was too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. Meghan had not simply missed an event. She had been quietly moved away from a platform connected to royal service, public compassion, and legacy. And in the language of monarchy, that kind of distance can speak louder than any public statement. Inside palace circles, some allegedly viewed the decision as a warning against competing royal brands. The crown, they argued, could not survive if every patronage became a battlefield for personal image, media loyalty, and global sympathy. Royal duty required unity, or at least the appearance of it. Anything that threatened to split attention away from the cause itself was now seen as a risk. And William, according to insiders, seemed determined to remove that risk before it could explode. The timing made the message even sharper. With Charles still carrying the burden of illness and the monarchy under constant public pressure, stability had become more than a preference. It had become a shield. Reports suggest William wanted future royal initiatives protected from distraction, especially those linked to charity, veterans, youth work, and national service. These were not simply events. They were proof that the monarchy still had purpose. And he could not allow that purpose to be swallowed by another cycle of Sussex controversy. Beatrice's appointment, meanwhile, became powerful precisely because of its restraint. She did not arrive with fanfare. She did not weaponize the moment. Her quiet presence was interpreted by many as proof that loyalty still had value inside the House of Windsor. Not loud loyalty, not performative loyalty, the old kind. The kind that waits, serves, and does not demand the spotlight as payment. But Meghan's exclusion reignited the media war almost instantly. Supporters saw cruelty, traditionalists saw discipline, commentators split into rival camps, each reading the cancellation through years of bitterness, interviews, memoirs, accusations, and broken trust. What should have been a charity ceremony became one of the most discussed palace controversies of the year, not because of what happened on the day itself, but because of what the day revealed. Soon, royal commentators began asking whether more patronage restructures could follow. If William was willing to make this move once, would other roles be reviewed? Would access become more conditional? Would the monarchy finally separate titles from influence in a way previous generations avoided? Those questions did not fade. They settled over the palace like a warning. Because once the crown begins measuring loyalty in public, every absence becomes evidence, every invitation becomes strategy, and every ceremony becomes a test. But even after the headlines faded, insiders insisted the emotional damage inside the family was far from over. In the end, the vanished ceremony became more than a cancelled royal appearance. It became a defining symbol of a monarchy, choosing structure over sentiment, discipline over spectacle, and institutional survival over personal reconciliation. By the time the story settled into royal history, William was no longer seen merely as the heir waiting for his moment. He was increasingly viewed as the architect of a stricter future, reshaping the monarchy around those he believed could be trusted when pressure reached its breaking point. The trusted circle was becoming smaller, the boundaries were becoming clearer, and inside the palace, insiders claimed the old era of ambiguity was ending. Meghan's removal was framed in two completely different ways. To her supporters, it was another wound, another humiliation, another sign that reconciliation had been sacrificed for control. To her critics, it was the unavoidable result of years of fractured trust, public conflict, and competing royal narratives. But whatever side people chose, one truth remained: the ceremony had exposed a deeper question the palace could no longer avoid. Who still had the right to carry royal influence? Beatrice's role, meanwhile, quietly elevated her standing within the modern royal structure. She had not demanded the spotlight, yet the spotlight found her. She had not publicly celebrated Meghan's exclusion, yet her restraint made her look more dependable. In a monarchy moving toward a colder, more controlled phase under William's influence, that kind of silence became its own form of strength. Charles, according to reports, continued balancing emotional family tensions with constitutional reality. He understood the personal pain behind every royal rupture, but he also understood the burden of the crown. Family peace mattered. But so did stability. And when those two forces collided, the institution could not afford to tremble. Still, the question of Harry and Meghan remained unresolved. Could reconciliation ever truly happen after moments like this? Could trust be rebuilt once access had been removed so publicly, even without a single official accusation? Or had the palace crossed into a new chapter where titles remained, but influence was no longer guaranteed? That was the final meaning of the cancelled ceremony. It was not only about Meghan, Beatrice, William, or one charity event lost to palace politics. It was about legacy. It was about trust. It was about a crown preparing for the future by deciding who could stand close to it and who would remain outside its guarded circle. Because within the House of Windsor, ceremonies can be cancelled, titles can shift, and loyalties can fracture, but the crown always remembers who stood beside it when the pressure became unbearable. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.